The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, 21 miles between the coast of Iran and the tip of the Musandam Peninsula. In global terms, that is nothing. A corridor so tight that commercial tankers transiting in both directions must follow designated traffic separation lanes, their hulls occasionally close enough that sailors on deck can read the names painted on the vessels passing in the opposite direction. Roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through this strait every single day. Every disruption, every provocation, every gray zone maneuver executed in these waters carries an economic consequence measured not in dollars, but in global market shocks. Everyone who operates here knows this, and some actors, for reasons of strategy, ideology, and calculated ambiguity, have decided that knowledge is leverage. It was a Wednesday. The time was 14:22 local. The temperature on the surface of the water was 31 degrees Celsius and rising. The sky was white with haze, the kind of haze that flattens depth perception, that makes a vessel 2 miles away look like it is 10 meters distant, that turns the horizon into a smear of silver and gray with no clean edge. An Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer was transiting the strait on the standard eastbound traffic lane, maintaining a steady 15 knots, her wake cutting a clean line through water the color of old copper. She was not alone. A small coastal tanker flying a Liberian flag was proceeding in the same lane approximately 4 miles ahead. But in the relevant tactical sense, she was the only warship in these particular waters at this particular moment. That was about to become complicated. In the ship's Combat Information Center, the watch had been running with elevated alertness since the morning intelligence brief. The pattern of Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy activity in the strait had been building for 72 hours. Small boat transits running closer to the traffic lanes than usual, a patrol vessel that had held a stationary position near the northern shore for the past 18 hours, helicopter activity from the Keshim Island installation that surveillance assets had been tracking since the previous night. None of it individually constituted a threat. Collectively, it constituted a picture, and the watch team was reading that picture very carefully. The ESM operator was the first to speak. His voice, characteristically flat and precise, came through the CIC's internal circuit at 14:27. New surface contacts, bearing 035, initial count 6, speed approximately 32 knots, classification, small combatants, IRGCN profile. 6 contacts, 32 knots, bearing 035, place them on the northern side of the traffic lane, emerging from the shallow coastal waters near the Iranian shoreline, where the IRGC maintained its forward boat stations. At 32 knots, they were not patrol vessels on a routine transit. At 32 knots, they were moving with purpose. The officer of the watch reached for his headset without being told. Captain CIC, 6 high-speed IR, GCN contacts, bearing 035, closing. Request your presence. The captain arrived 40 seconds later. She studied the display for a long moment, tracking the contact icons as they resolved from vague returns into distinct individual tracks. The contacts were separating as they closed, spreading laterally, 2 on the left flank, 2 converging directly ahead, 2 angling to come up on the starboard quarter. It was a textbook IRGC swarm approach geometry, designed to create simultaneous threats from multiple vectors, designed to complicate targeting solutions, designed to force a decision under time pressure. She had studied this geometry in every professional development course since her first deployment to Fifth Fleet waters. She had wargamed it. She had briefed it to junior officers. Now she was watching it materialize on her tactical display in real time. All stations, this is the captain. I have the watch. Maintain course and speed. Log the time and contacts. I want full recording on all systems. Radar, optical, ESM, everything. Nothing gets deleted. She turned to the communications officer. Channel 16. Open it. Are they transmitting? Negative, ma'am. No radio contact. Silence is a signal. The IRGC boats had not announced themselves, had not issued any navigational warning, had not initiated contact on the international safety frequency. Their silence was deliberate. It preserved their ability to claim, if events were later reviewed, that they had been engaged in routine patrol operations and had no hostile intent. It was a tactic refined over years of gray zone operations in exactly these waters. The ambiguity was the weapon. The destroyer was not deceived by ambiguity. Her sensors were reading the approach geometry clearly. The lead pair of fast attack craft were now 14 nautical miles ahead and closing. At their current relative speed, they would reach the ship's position in approximately 11 minutes. The flanking pairs were maneuvering to positions that, if maintained, would place them within 500 meters of the hull on both sides simultaneously, well within the range of the heavy machine guns and RPG launchers that IRGC fast boats routinely carried. At sea, distance is language. 500 meters said something very specific. It said, "We can touch you." The captain's response was measured, methodical, and unhurried in its execution, even as it moved at the pace required by the situation. Combat Systems Officer, Set River City. I want a full MCON assessment before we light up anything additional. What do we have airborne in the area? P8. Poseidon is on station 40 miles east, ma'am. They have the picture. MH-60R is fueled and armed on the flight deck. Alert 5. Bring it to Alert 2. Don't launch yet. Alert 2 meant the helicopter crew was in the aircraft, rotors turning, ready to lift within 2 minutes on order. It was a preparation, not a commitment. It communicated readiness without displaying aggression. Every action in this sequence was being calibrated on that axis. Sufficient to demonstrate capability, insufficient to provide pretext. At 14:33, the 6 contacts had resolved into a configuration that left no room for alternative interpretation. 2 IRGC Mark V equivalent fast attack craft were now positioned approximately 8 nautical miles directly ahead of the destroyer, holding a course that would bring them across the destroyer's bow at a CPA of less than 300 meters. A crossing maneuver designed to force a course alteration or risk collision. The flanking elements had separated to 3 miles on each side and were matching the destroyer's speed, holding their relative positions like brackets. The 2 boats coming up from astern had slowed slightly, falling into a trailing position that completed the encirclement. The geometry was complete. The destroyer was boxed. In the CIC, the Surface Warfare Coordinator ran the CPA calculations and reported them without inflection. The watch team logged every measurement. The ESM suite was picking up fire control radar emissions from at least 2 of the boats, not a targeting lock, but an active interrogation. They were painting the destroyer with radar, telling her they could see her, telling her they had the solutions they needed if they chose to act on them. The captain made 3 decisions in rapid succession. First, the ship's LRAD, the long-range acoustic device, was activated on the bearing of the 2 lead craft. The LRAD broadcast on an international maritime distress hailing frequency in Farsi, then English, unidentified vessels approaching United States naval vessel. You are approaching at an unsafe distance. Alter course immediately. This vessel is operating in international waters in accordance with international law. All actions are being recorded. The broadcast was calm. It was not a warning shot. It was a documented communication that would appear in every official record of this event. Proof that the destroyer had made every reasonable effort to de-escalate through established channels before taking any other action. Second, the ship's crew went to general quarters, not because combat was imminent, but because readiness was non-negotiable. Damage control teams moved to their stations. The gun crews manned the 25mm autocannon mounts on both bridge wings. The missile systems were not activated. That decision had not been made and would not be made without a further explicit escalation from the Iranian side. But every system that could be brought to immediate readiness was. Third, the MH-60R was launched. The helicopter lifted from the flight deck at 1437 and banked hard to the north, climbing rapidly to 1,500 feet, where its sensors, FLIR, radar, acoustic, could build a complete picture of the small boat formation. It was visible to the IRGC boats immediately. They could see it on radar, they could hear it, and within 90 seconds of its launch, they could see its navigation lights descending toward them as it took up a surveillance orbit directly above the lead pair. The message was not subtle. A helicopter armed with a Mark 54 lightweight torpedo and Hellfire missiles orbiting at 500 feet is not a threat. It is the announcement that a threat exists and is present and is watching everything you do. It is the declaration whatever happens next will be documented, analyzed, and, if necessary, acted upon with precision that your speed and your numbers cannot outrun. The IRGC boats had operated in these waters for years. Their crews were not ignorant of what an MH-60R represented. They had seen them before. They understood the calculus. At 1441, the lead pair of fast attack craft, now 4 miles ahead of the destroyer, began to alter their crossing approach. The change was subtle initially, a heading adjustment of perhaps 8 degrees to the right, barely enough to move the projected CPA from 300 meters to 600, but it was the beginning of a change. The ESM operator noted the alteration and reported it. The Surface Warfare Coordinator updated the CPA projection. The captain did not change her expression. She did not acknowledge the shift with any visible reaction. She continued watching the display. The Seahawk pilot, orbiting above the lead boats, activated the non-lethal laser designator At 1443, 3 pulses, green, directed at the forward deck of the lead fast attack craft. Not the bridge, the forward deck. A calibrated placement that communicated precision without threatening the crew directly. It said, "We know exactly where you are. We know exactly what is on your deck. We can see the weapons. We see the crew. We see everything." On the radio, simultaneously, the communications officer aboard the destroyer transmitted again on Channel 16. This time, in Farsi only. The message was shorter. It was a single sentence. This encounter is being monitored by United States Naval Aviation and transmitted to 5th Fleet headquarters in real time. That sentence carried its specific weight. It was not a threat. It was a fact. And the IRGC commanders knew it was a fact. What was unfolding in the Strait of Hormuz at this moment was not a private conversation between a destroyer and 6 fast boats. It was a recorded, documented, transmitted event that was being watched in Manama, in Pearl Harbor, in the Pentagon, and almost certainly by intelligence collection platforms operated by allied nations. Every course change, every radar emission, every radio transmission was being captured. There would be no version of this event that could be shaped into something it was not. That knowledge, the knowledge of being fully seen and fully documented, was its own form of deterrence. At 1447, the IRGC formation began to dissolve, not all at once and not cleanly. The flanking boats on the starboard side maintained their position for another 4 minutes, as though testing whether the destroyer's calm was genuine or performative. The port side pair reduced speed and fell back. The trailing elements turned south, back toward the Iranian coast. The lead pair completed their course alteration and passed ahead of the destroyer at a CPA of just over 1 nautical mile, still uncomfortably close by any civilian standard, but operationally a withdrawal when measured against where they had been heading 3 minutes earlier. By 1453, the encirclement had ended. The 6 contacts were dispersing. The Seahawk maintained its orbit for another 12 minutes, tracking the boats until they were unambiguously withdrawing, then returned to the destroyer's flight deck at 1511. The captain stood at the tactical display until 1500, watching the contact separate and grow distant. Then she turned to the watch team. "I'll reconstruct the entire event. I want the timeline precise to the second. I want every ESM capture, every optical frame from the FLIR, every LRAD broadcast logged with timestamp. Compile for 5th Fleet within 2 hours." She paused at the hatch of the CIC, the same way captains always pause at hatches, in that moment between the operational space and everything else. "The crew performed exactly as trained," she said. "Pass that to the XO." The destroyer continued her transit of the Strait of Hormuz. She cleared the Narrows at 1640 and entered the Gulf of Oman under a sky that had begun, finally, to show the first deep blue of late afternoon. The haze had lifted. The horizon was clean. What had unfolded in those 91 minutes in the narrowest international waterway in the world would be reviewed, briefed, and incorporated into 5th Fleet doctrine. Not because it was a crisis. It had never reached the threshold of a crisis, but precisely because it had not. Because 6 fast attack craft deployed with apparent intent to coerce, harass, and intimidate a United States warship in international waters, had found themselves confronted not with panic, not with aggression, not with a trigger pulled in ambiguity, but with a wall of calm professionalism so complete and so documented that proceeding further would have cost them everything and gained them nothing. The IRGC had executed this tactic successfully in the past. They had forced course alterations. They had generated international headlines. They had created, in other contexts, the impression of vulnerability in American naval operations in the Gulf. But the tactics that produce confusion against an unprepared force produce something very different against a force that has studied them, trained against them, and built its operating procedures around the assumption that they will come. They will always come. The question is never whether. The question is whether, when they come, the ship in their sights is ready. This ship was ready. Modern naval power in contested waterways is not measured in tonnage or range or targeting solutions, though all of those matter. It is measured in the seconds between a provocation and a response, and specifically in the quality of that response. A response that is too slow concedes initiative. A response that is too aggressive concedes the moral and legal high ground that underlies the entire framework of freedom of navigation. A response that is precisely calibrated, that is fast enough to be unambiguous, restrained enough to be lawful, and documented well enough to be undeniable, is the only response that wins. The Strait of Hormuz remained open. The tankers transited. The markets did not notice. The world kept moving. And somewhere on the Iranian coast, 6 fast attack craft returned to their moorings, having accomplished nothing except the generation of 91 additional minutes of evidence that the United States Navy understood these waters better than anyone who had attempted to challenge it in them. At sea, the greatest weapon is not the one you fire. It is the one your adversary realizes, too late, that you never needed to fire at all. There is a particular kind of institutional knowledge that accumulates in a naval force across generations of deployment. It is not the knowledge of tactics alone, although tactics matter enormously. It is the knowledge of adversary psychology, of what certain actors want when they send fast boats into a shipping lane, of what they are testing, what they are measuring, what outcome they are hoping to produce. The IRGC had been probing United States naval patience in these waters since the tanker wars of the 1980s. That is, 4 decades of interaction. 4 decades during which American naval commanders have learned, sometimes painfully, what works and what creates the kind of incident that ends careers and starts crises. What works is what happened today. Preparation so thorough that surprise is impossible. Discipline so complete that provocation produces no reaction beyond the recording of evidence. Escalation so calibrated that each step is proportionate, documented, and defensible in any form, legal, diplomatic, or operational. And throughout all of it, a silence at the command level that communicates something the IRGC's doctrine cannot easily counter. We are not afraid of you, and we are not going to give you what you came here for. What the IRGC came for, in the long analytical view, is never really the confrontation itself. A fast boat swarm cannot sink an Arleigh Burke destroyer. The math of that engagement is not ambiguous. What the IRGC seeks in these probes is the headline. The video of a United States warship changing course, of American sailors on deck looking uncertain, of a superpower apparently intimidated by asymmetric pressure in its own operational theater. That headline, amplified through state media and social channels, is worth far more to Tehran than a sunken boat or a wounded sailor. It is a narrative weapon. It says, the Americans flinch on this day in this strait at 14:22 on a Wednesday afternoon. The Americans did not flinch. They documented. They responded proportionately. They communicated clearly. And when the IRGC boats dispersed, the only footage that existed of the encounter was footage that told exactly the opposite story from the one Tehran had hoped to write. The Strait of Hormuz will see more of these encounters. The geography of the place, the economics of the oil that flows through it, and the ideological imperatives of the forces that operate along its northern shore guarantee it. The question is not whether there will be a next time. The question is whether the next crew in the next ship will be as prepared, as disciplined, and as thoroughly trained as the crew that held their course on this particular Wednesday. The answer, if the Navy continues to do its work, is yes. The answer has to be yes, because in waters this narrow, with stakes this high, the margin between a professionally managed standoff and an internationally destabilizing incident is measured not in nautical miles, but in the quality of the judgment exercised by the officer standing at the tactical display in the red light of the CIC, watching the geometry close, and choosing clearly, calmly, and correctly what to do next.